And this is supported by Airfield at War, a group which gives an accurate portrayal of the World War I Royal Flying Corps, whose reenactors will be situated next to those World War I replica aircraft. All of those items are happening in the blue zone, and the open flightline walk is open.
Oh, you're welcome. Have a really nice time. And good luck. Yeah, the trouble is the people we used to get them from.
Royal Air Force service, and by that famous pilot Lettice Curtis, famed for her air transport auxiliary exploits during the Second World War. two Hispano Buchons, which will be taking the slot after the aeroplane which is seen at airborne. Teichmann then, the founder of the Hangar 11 collection, landing on after his display with the P-51 D Mustang. Aviation to come up with a new design that immediately showed outstanding qualities in terms of performance. Played a significant role, as indeed as the Buchons take off this airfield. The engine originally chosen for North American's new fighter was the Allison V1710, an outstanding aero engine, and one with which the early Mustangs, including the A36 attack variant, were rapidly proving their worth. With the Allison engine, North American... been made over the years of Luftwaffe fighter pilots being ordered not to engage yaks in lower level dogfights. I've never been quite sure of the truth behind that. Initially they hit upon French Hispano Suiza engines, but they suffered all sorts of problems, especially over... attack aircraft, and they saw a good deal of action. They were on active service in Spanish West Africa when it was threatened by Moroccan insurgents and other rebel forces. A squadron of Buchons flew with North American T-6 Texans of the Spanish Air Force in policing the 1960s, when it was thought that perhaps the Buchon story had come to a close. But not so. A large number of the ex-Spanish Air Force Buchons were brought together for the making of the movie Battle of Britain. They started filming in Spain in March 1968. 16 of those Buchons came here to... rates of turn and roll especially, and so when it entered service in 1943 and came up against Luftwaffe fighters like the Messerschmitt Bf 109G, escort missions and ground attack sweeps over Germany, Austria and Czechoslovakia at that late point of World War II. Getting airborne off the hard runway now, the Yak 3, that'll be back with us shortly. As I say, the Mustang in those very familiar red tail colours and with the name tall in the saddle by which that aeroplane is named, PW. And low-level tactical reconnaissance roles, but at high altitude the Allison engine's performance was somewhat lacking. One of the Allison engine Mustangs came to Duxford, stationed here for a good part of World War II before the Americans moved in 1943, was an RAF unit called the Air Fighting Development Unit. It's tasked to refine tactics at Campbell Ord, and a Rolls-Royce pilot named Ronnie Harker, a great friend of Campbell Ord. Harker acted as the engine manufacturer's liaison with customer air arms operating products powered by Rolls-Royce engines. Both of them were of the view that the performance of the new North American fighter would be transferred. Mustang airframe mated to the Merlin engine. Thus was produced a fighter that was able to operate at high altitudes and over long ranges. In short, one of the great escort fighters of the war. The Yak 3 with a higher stalling speed and thus a higher landing speed than other contemporary fighters. Pretty short range. And here it's flying as our little book to the 80th anniversary of the establishment of the Normandy Yeoman Regiment. Martin F-35. Martin Tesley, the commanding officer of 132 Air Wing in the modern day Royal Norwegian Air Force, bringing to a close his sequence with the Vampire FB6.
Yeah. The runway is needed.
Hello, incidentally, to everyone watching on Planes TV who are live broadcasting today's show. A 1-month subscription costs just £10, which will enable you to watch this show again, as well as more than 100 other air shows and other features from Planes TV's archive, a lot of them from Duxford. If you stay subscribed, there will be a lot of new programmes being added this winter, including a request show. Website, once again, planestv.com. Now, as the Vampire clears, getting into the air, one of the great favourites of any Duxford air show, the Boeing B-17G Flying Fortress, named Sunny B. And as Sally B climbs away past the American Air Museum building here, we recall the fact that it's 25 years since the American Air Museum was inaugurated at IWM Duxford in a ceremony for which Queen Elizabeth II was present. A glass sculpture, a glass wall, entitled Counting the Cost, which has on it the silhouettes of all of the American aircraft, mainly of the US Army Air Forces, but also some of the US Navy, that were lost on operations from the UK between 1942, when American forces arrived on British soil, and the end of World War II in Europe in 1945. And the scale of those losses, when you see them depicted in that way, with the silhouettes of each of the aircraft concerned, is really quite humbling. It's in tribute to all of those servicemen and more on the Allied side, which tribute is paid by the sole airworthy B-17 Flying Fortress in Europe. And Colin, watching it over Duxford, a US Army Air Forces fighter station, of course, allows us to recall the presence of the Americans, not just here, but across the whole of East Anglia with the 8th Air Force.
Yes, the impact of the arrival of the 8th Army Air Force must have been quite something here in East Anglia, which back in the 1940s was a very remote part of England. The stars of the silver screen. And some of them, in fact, became locals because Clark Gable, probably the most famous, possibly the most famous actor of all time, back in 1939 when he was in Gone with the Wind, suddenly he is based here in East Anglia. And Jimmy Stewart as well, of course, was another man who became part of the 8th in the skies over Europe, about 20,000 feet, something like that, in temperatures of
Incredible record. In that, the support given by members of the Sally B Supporters Club is absolutely crucial. As we were saying earlier, you can sign up today and do your bit to help keep this aircraft flying by going to their stand, which when the B-17 parks up, again after the end of this display, is situated just in front of it, with the Sally B flags flying obviously at half-mast this weekend, but now definitely flying rather than earlier when they were hanging there when there was much less breeze. So you can't miss them. Go and see the team there, and they will be D-17 on display days, or alternatively you can join online at www.sallyb.org.uk. But whatever, it is one of the great causes in historic aviation, and long may this aircraft continue to fly. Now we're getting our aircraft for our next formation into the air with the Bristol Blenheim first off. Then we've got two Westland Lysanders. The B-17 on its downwind leg there over the tail of the Chilterns, such an evocative sight. Including just one in the nose turret on the B-17C models, which were some of the earlier ones to deploy, to 13 machine guns on B-17G models like this.
Yes, originally there was the belief that it would be able to as well, and gradually, as the new models came along, there was much more armament. The losses, together with the support, particularly the support of the P-51 fighters, the losses gradually were reduced.
Flying Sally B for us today, Dutchman Peter Kuipers and co-pilot Daryl Taplin. A quite beautiful display.
20,000 Allied American servicemen died as a result of activities by the 8th Army Air Force and the 9th Army Air Force in One of the aspects of the daylight bombing rate, of course, was that they were aiming for precision bombing. Their training, largely in the clear blue skies of California, they would use the Norden bomb site and get really good results. However, in Europe, we've seen what conditions can be like. You know, the weather conditions are nothing like California, and also getting attacked by the artillery, the flak, the German fighters, certainly reduced the success of those raids.
Yeah, we need to emphasise these were daylight bombing raids. Unlike RAF Bomber Command mainly striking by night, the 8th Air Force was attacking by day, German industrial targets, transport and resupply networks and so forth. During World War II, this aircraft entirely privately operated from Duxford under the leadership of Lysander, as it has been for decades.
Lead commentator is Ben Donnell. Ben.
Thank you very much indeed to Colin Wilshire, who will, of course, be with me throughout this afternoon's flight. And when that aircraft returns at 1:10 that will be the moment at which we will conclude our 2-minute silence in honour of
the captured. The signals will go back to England, and the Germans will be waiting for these aircraft there. Very often agents were delivered straight into the hands of the waiting German forces. But if you think about these aeroplanes and you imagine them flying off their missions one at a time, but New Verity, who I did meet some years ago, told me that very often they were flying pairs and sometimes in 3 at a time to land in those remote fields in occupied France.
And the second of the two Lysanders flying past that's there, the one from the Shuttleworth collection, is in the colours of a number 161 Squadron Special Duties Lysander, as they were euphemistically known, and it's in that configuration they used to support the AF. So, the Air Ministry decided to adopt it as a new light bomber for the Royal Air Force. Earliest RAF actions of World War II involved Blenheims. On the 3rd of September, the day we declared war against Germany, and number 139 Squadron Blenheim from significant number of Vampires, because this aircraft was one of the mainstays of the then frontline Royal Air Force, and in tribute to the late Queen, the Norwegian Air Force Historical Squadron has painted on one wing of this single-seat Vampire a black wing band in salute, and here it is. Especially successful in that role. They also patrolled potential invasion areas along the south coast. Rather boring work for their pilots. But Colin, anything but boring were the missions undertaken by Lysanders in support of the SOE, the Special Operations Executive.
Yes, Churchill set the mission for the SOE to set Europe ablaze, and this rather unusual, as you say, rather unusual looking aircraft is perfect for the missions that they carried out. It's a very rugged aeroplane, ideal for landing in rough ground, short takeoff and landing role. They were used as a taxi service to ferry agents into occupied France, and the whole prospect of doing this.
Of course, Colin, they were landing by moonlight. That's the title of Hugh Verity's memoir about his time as an SOE pilot. Maybe with just a few flares lit to mark the strip.
Exactly, agents would be captured, and the signals would go back to England, and the Germans would be waiting for these aircraft to land. Very often, agents were delivered straight into the hands of the waiting German forces. But you think about these airplanes, and you imagine them flying off their missions one at a time. But Hugh Verity, who I did meet some years ago, told me that very often they were flying pairs, and sometimes in three at a time, to land
First to break from the formation is the Gladiator. The aircraft is always nice to see at Duxford because its predecessor, the Gloucester Gauntlet, was one of the types flown from here between the wars by number 19 Squadron in Norway against a German invasion. 263 Squadron's aeroplanes had arrived aboard the Royal Navy carrier HMS Glorious in April. After only a few days, they were evacuated. Quite a lot of history's notable aircraft have started life as private ventures, and so it was with the Gladiator. Gloucester's design team developed it without a particular requirement to bid for. But as the RAF's new monoplane fighters, the Spitfires, Hurricanes, Balbo, Defiants and so forth were delayed, the RAF decided it needed an interim fighter, and Gloucester's new design, which they had named the SS-37 and had made a very early public appearance at the 1935 Royal Review of the RAF here at Duxford, seemed to fit the bill. It entered service with number 72 Squadron in February 1937. But the fact that the tide was turning away from the biplane fighter in favour of the monoplane became all too apparent. 4 RAF units were operating Gladiators when war broke out in September 1939. 2 of those squadrons were sent to France as part of the Advanced Air Striking Force. All their aircraft had been lost within just 10 days of coming up against the Germans in May 1940.
Well, they hoped a friendly field to land in. Just looking out of the window to try and see the right signal to give them.
Squadron, which was reformed here in October 1939 in efforts to help protect Channel shipping, went on to convert to Spitfires in the spring of 1940, and we've got 2 later war ex-222 Squadron Spitfires in our Spitfire fitter service. Different manufacturers, different design philosophies, but all fighters that were active at a very difficult time in world history. In they come, the Supermarine Spitfire Mk, leading the Curtis Hawk 75A1, Grumman Wildcat, '38 was the year when war clouds really began to gather in Europe. There was the Munich crisis, which thankfully didn't at that point result in hostilities, but which did see RAF Fighter Command being called to wartime readiness, and many of its previously silver-winged biplane fighters, like the Gladiator that we just biplane warplanes during the 1920s and 30s. You can see one of them on external static display here in the form of the Fury. Of the Fury design, utilising many of the same construction techniques and design philosophies that Cam and his team at Hawker at RAF Duxford, number 19 Squadron received the first Supermarine Spitfires, and they are represented by the Mark 1A that leads this 4-ship of British and American fighters of that period. Hurrican 1 then breaking off. leaving the Spitfire 1A, the Wildcat and the Hawk orbiting in front of us. Performing individually for us, starting off with the Hurrican 1. And here we see an aircraft that really represents the US Navy requirement, so Grumman redesigned it into a monoplane. They then redesigned it again when the first of the monoplane designs they came up with proved not exactly to fit the bill, and the result was the F4F Wildcat with the R1830 engine. The Spitfire and pulling up. An absolute. They replaced the Sea Gladiators of 804 Squadron based on Orkney just in time to officially be categorised as taking part in the Battle of Britain. This remarkable airworthy survivor, following its shoot-down on the 26th of May 1940 over the beaches of Dunkirk on what was its one and only operational mission. Really, the entry into service at Duxford of the Spitfire in the summer of 1938 with number 19 Squadron typifies the transition from the monoplane to biplane period. They replaced the Gloucester Gauntlet. Gordon Sinclair was a pre-war pilot with number 19 Squadron. What was then the US Army Air Corps, later to become the Army Air Forces, staged a competitive fly-off between a new fighter from the Curtiss Company, the Model 75, and a new offering from rival manufacturer Seversky, the P-35. The Seversky aircraft actually won, but it was much more expensive than the Curtiss design. Ordered 210 examples initially of what it dubbed the P-36. It was very soon obsolete in American service. Curtiss also had the new P-40 family of aircraft under development. A few P-36s were stationed at Pearl Harbor and Hawaii at the time of the Japanese attack on the 7th of December 1941 that brought America into the war. That was the type's only combat in American service. Two of them managed to shoot down Mitsubishi Zeros of the Imperial Japanese Navy. aircraft had already proved its worth with export customers, and this is a genuine ex-French Armée de l'Air Hawk 75A1 that flew during the Battle of France. It was the French Air Force's standard fighter at the outbreak of war, alongside the Morin-Saunier MS-406 and Douati D5. The first patrol by the newly formed unit took place from Duxford on the 18th of August 1940. At 20 to 6 that evening, a large number of German aircraft were engaged in bombing objectives in the area of the Thames estuary. The squadron was ordered off to patrol the area around North Weald in Essex, below the cloud base. They landed back having not sighted the enemy, but their time would soon come. Number 310 Squadron, the first of the Czechoslovak manned units to form up again here at Duxford with Hurricans on the 29th of August 1940. And both would be a significant part of operations during the weeks that followed. Not since World War II have representatives of the Czech Air Force been back to Duxford. That has all changed at this Battle of Britain Airshow. We see representatives of that air arm on display here for the first time now, and with two mighty pieces of Warsaw-packed era rotary equipment from the Czech Air Force. The mill I-35 leads the middle Mi-35, an export version of the Mi-24V, a type better known by its NATO codename of Hind. The Mi-171 is in turn an export version of the Mi-17, also a product of the Mill Design Bureau, and it goes by the NATO codename of HIP. And together, these two types in different versions have been mainstays of first the Czechoslovak, and since the country was split into the Czech Republic and Slovakia, the Czech Air Force for many decades. Breathing in from either end of the Mi-35 from the left, Mi-171 from the right. These are quintessential Cold War weapons, supported a Warsaw-packed armed advance across the North German plain into the rest of Western Europe. Had the than thankfully it ever became. And they would have been supported in the assault transport role by the hip. And as the hip rotates at display centre, we see the crew flying the Union flag from the open rear loading ramp in their salute to you. Developments in a hugely successful line of MIL helicopter types, all under the NATO codename HIP, which started with the Mi-8, which was built to the tune of more than 17,000 examples, the largest and longest production run of any helicopter in history and still counting, used across the Soviet Union for military and civil roles throughout the Soviet sphere of influence as well. The Mi-17 was given more powerful versions of the Klimov TV3 turboshaft engine. And in excess of 12,000 of those, including Mi-171s like this, have been built. Reality, and of course, the Czech Republic has been a member nation of NATO since 1999. This Mi-171 now heading back into the airfield from the left. The state of the art as far as the Czech hips are concerned. Rear loading ramp having replaced the previous clamshell doors. There's the hip lifting off again after that touch and go landing. Type able to carry 24 fully equipped troops. Nearly for only a short while. The records showing that it was present only between August and September 1940. Number 310 Squadron, however, would stay until June of 1941. And incidentally, just to the left of the control tower is a Spitfire that very tangibly links past and present the Mark 5C of the Shuttleworth collection. It appears in the markings of number 312 Squadron from slightly later in World War II, but it also served with number 3 moved away and converted to Spitfire 5s. Therefore all the more special to have the Czech Air Force with us at the same time as Shuttleworth have brought their Spitfire 5 AR-501 with all of that tremendous Second World War Czechoslovak history to participate in our show. Now we're going to see another Spitfire representing yet another facet of the Supermarine fighters. Crosswind limits for its safe operation, and so the decision's been taken to remove that from today's programme, I'm afraid. But I'm sure you'll appreciate the reason why, as George Hay brings in the Spitfire 16 He's been flying that aeroplane very regularly out of Duxford this summer, a relatively new pilot as far as the display scene is concerned, but very nice to welcome him to this Battle of Britain Airshow flying programme, and very nice indeed also to welcome to the commentary box Tim Emrys Roberts, who is here.
There used to be another one, but they're down to 7 this season. They fly much noisier red aircraft, but we fly these delightful 1930s and 40s de Havilland DH-82A Tiger Moths. Now we've seen some spirited displays today by Spitfires and Hurricanes, Gladiator, tactic of a finger four, 2 pairs, leader and wingman each. Here they come through in Vic formation. Another former RAF fighter pilot, flying Hunters, Lightnings and Phantoms. And he, in 1978, flew the very aircraft you see today, solo, unassisted, from England to Australia. Today, he is an oyster farmer in Scotland. On his right is Goodyeer Corsair, a former RAF Tornado pilot, and he is now based in Luxembourg and has come across to entertain you today. They make it look easy, but in fact it's very hard to hold station in such a lightly loaded aircraft. 19 British Air Display Association's trophy, which has formerly been won by the Red Arrows. I'd like to talk about the last 3 members. Last but definitely not least, Nigel Lemon led the 3rd of the Vics, and he is flying again a rare aircraft, a DH-60 G3 Moth Major country. And it was from the Moth that the Tiger Moth was developed, and the Moth itself has straight wings, but the Tiger Moth has swept wings, which have been achieved by moving the centre forward and therefore the wingtips back in order to give the instructor, who would sit in the front seat, a better chance of getting out with a parachute. On Nigel's right is Jeremy Radcliffe, who is a consultant anaesthetist, but also a space doctor. So if you're wishing to be an astronaut, he's the man you'll see. Here they are, coming from right to left in Delta formation. Volunteer Reserve Flight Lieutenant, and this was the colours that the aircraft would have worn in its early days in the 30s. True yellow. Come the outbreak of war, the upper surfaces, the wings and the fuselage would have been painted in camouflage, but leaving yellow on the underside to keep themselves protected from attack. An unarmed aircraft, but they did actually make 20 with a single machine gun firing through the propeller with synchronized mechanism. That was for the Persian military, for counterinsurgency, and indeed they experimented with attaching 8 20-pound bombs underneath the fuselage if Hitler had gone ahead and invaded England. Followed closely behind by Jonathan Elwes, a man who's done all sorts of adventurous trips in this very aircraft, including, as I say, a recreation of the charge of the Light Brigade over the Crimea, where the Ukrainian army let off explosions. They were just below them in half on wheels for the army. Next down, the leader, Jeff Nilsson, in that distinctive green and silver aircraft. Followed closely that rare aircraft, the Moth Major DH-60, flown by Nigel Lemon, who actually built it himself. He's an aircraft engineer, who I said rebuilt it, I should say. It took him 20 years to do it. It's his pride and joy. Technical consultant anaesthetist. This aircraft still has the mounting points for wing-walking apparatus, because it was a wing-walking plane in its day. Next down, actually quite a famous aircraft, this yellow one with the motion pictures, the most recent being the King's Speech, where it landed on the grounds of Hatfield House, doubling as sound.
Here at Duxford in the past, in fact, in the early 1990s, when it was owned by the late David Talichet. It then went off to the States, suffered an accident there, was returned to the UK and rebuilt. As the Spitfire company to land, a quick note about the continuation of the flying programme later on. We are, I'm afraid, not going to be seeing the Hawk and Nimrod in today's display either. This is because, I'm sure you will appreciate, we had a bit of a stiffening crosswind at Duxford today. Don't expect it to cause any too mighty naval fighters on the F2 D Bearcat. To meet a requirement for a new US Navy fighter. Why has it got that wing configuration, you might ask? Well, the reason is because it has a simply enormous... As you can see, the Corsair now giving us a solo, this in the colours of 1850 Squadron. The Fleet Air Arm suggested it should be given a bulged canopy to improve the pilot's vision, so they did that, and there were various other refinements as well. 18 squadrons of the Fleet Air Arm at this type's peak in Royal Navy service were equipped with Corsairs, and they served in the European theatre as well as in the Pacific. For example, when Operation Tungsten was launched in 1944 to attack the German battleship Tirpitz, Corsairs of the Royal Navy were involved, and in 1945 flying from the carriers HMS Victorious and Formidable. wheeled, and I think about half a dozen or so of the Tigers of the Tiger 9 will also be heading home.
Battle of Britain Photography Evening is an outdoor, after-hours photography event dedicated to this pivotal moment in 20th century history. It's taking place this Thursday, that's the 15th of September, this Thursday. Tickets are available to book now, and you can do that via the IWM website. And if you are interested in the Battle of Britain in particular, then
from service by the Czech Republic around the end of this year, beginning of next, and they're not slated to come back to the twos at RAF Fairford in particular. We saw some memorable team displays by Czech Hinds, one of which in 1995 by a 3-ship display won that year's Sir Douglas Bader Trophy for best overall flying demonstration. And now this is the last of those Czech Hind demonstrations in the UK. And as this aircraft flies alone, you can get to see the colour scheme that's been specially applied to this aeroplane. It comes from the 221st Helicopter Squadron, based at Náměšť nad Oslavou. And that unit, or rather that base I should say, specifically today holds the traditions of the only Czechoslovak manned bomber squadron to serve as part of the RAF during World War II, number 311 Squadron, which operated first the Vickers Wellington and then the Consolidated Liberator. So, painted on one side of the Hind is a depiction of a Wellington, on the other side a Liberator. the 221st Helicopter Squadron is one of 2 units in the Czech Air Force, which is a member of the NATO Tiger Association, the organisation formed in 1961 that brings together units from across the NATO alliance that have either a tiger or nowadays also other big cats in their emblem. It's just another example of how firmly these former Warsaw Pact was made carried in 2 each in cylindrical containers on those pylons. You can also carry rockets and automatic grenade launchers and up. Really is one of the last vestiges of the Eastern Bloc days, still in service with the modern Czech Air Force. Types such as the MiG-21, 23 and 29 and the Sukhoi Su-22 having long since been retired in favour of Western equipment. their final bow of an excellent display sequence. The pilot, Major Vaktav Spacek, co-pilot Captain Martin Miensil, and the flight engineer, Warrant Officer Jan Suchanek, together from the 221st Helicopter Squadron of the Czech Air Force for the last time in the UK with the Mil Mi-35. And a very fitting tribute by the Czech Air Force at Duxford this weekend to their forebears who flew from this airfield in 1940. Now, I mentioned earlier how it was at the then International Air Tattoo, now the Royal International Air Tattoo at RAF Fairford, that we first began to see the likes of the Czech Air Force appear on the display circuit after the fall of the Eastern Bloc. Well, a man who remembers those days with great affection, I'm sure, and perhaps with the odd other memory, with some of the difficulties that can be, as Peter Kuipers brings his Beech D-17S into land. He's in Geoffrey Lynch's aeroplane. Nigel, we've seen here displaying the Anglian Warbirds Harvard in the past, Chipmunks, various other aeroplanes. The flight instructor based at Earl's Cone in Essex. A very, very capable display pilot indeed. Two Beech D-17Ss then. Spitfires to overheating while on the ground, so they'll be getting going last and then getting into position. And it's a magnificent array. Every time we have max Spitfires at a Duxford Airshow, it's a different array of them with new restorations, new acquisitions, returnees. There are the marbles firing up the line. The aircraft that's going to be filling what we call the Joker slot, forming solo while the big formation gets together. Is an example of that, the red and silver Spitfire F-14E, the only Griffin-engined aircraft in this formation, which is otherwise all Merlins. This aeroplane was operated from Duxford during the 2000s by Aircraft Restoration Company, then went off to the States. It's since returned in the ownership of a company called Aerial Speed Icons, but ARC still looked after it here at Duxford, and this weekend is its first public air show appearance since it came back to the UK. There are so many other stories contained within the aircraft we're going to see in this display. Not least two of the single-seat Mark 9s, just a few serials apart from one another off the production line. MH434 from the old Flying Machine Company, many of you know well, but MH415 operated from Seinfeld have shared history. Those two airframes which are going to be flying together towards the back of the Spitfire element of the formation. Both of them appear in their original number 222 Natal squadron markings. Both of them flew together from Duxford in 1968 during the making of the Hurrican film. Both MH434 and MH415 the same sortie on the 19th of August 1943. Both of these brand newly delivered Spitfire 9s. MH415 with number 129 Squadron, 434 with number 222 Squadron. Both part of the wing station at Hornchurch in Essex. On that day, 19th of August 1943, they were flown as high cover to 36 Martin Marauders of the US Army Air Forces, attacking the Luftwaffe airfield at Poix-Picardy in France, while rammed on during a strike. pictures on the 26th of May 1940. Covered by the shifting sands, but later recovered, subject to an outstanding rebuild here at the historic Flying and Aircraft Restoration Company facilities. And this Duxford Spitfire veteran has the honour of leading off our big wing. All airborne with the Hurrican 1B of the Shuttleworth collection bringing up the rear. And I shouldn't neglect also to mention one of the most distinctive aircraft in our Spitfires that had never before seen that shape in their skies, even during hostilities. And that aircraft in itself, a distinguished
say, they're good for falling down.
The end of the year. We've told you a good deal about it over the course of the day. There are the in the cockpit sessions with Spitfire N3200, which led the finale formation today. You can sit in the cockpit of that 19th Squadron veteran. Duxford in a different light. The Battle of Britain photography evening takes place here after hours. A day of lectures from guests. Finale, our last airshow. This weekend filming for upcoming Battle of Britain content for the History Hit channel, and also to be here